Welcome, dear viewers. For more thrilling and exclusive stories every week, become a member. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy your coffee. The core the Apollo astronauts found wasn't a dead machine. It was a heart, made of a crystalline metal that was beating once every 1,000 years. But when they removed a sample, they broke its rhythm. Now it beats once a day. I've seen the classified seismic data. With every beat, the core expands, fracturing the rock around it. The moon isn't just a rock in the sky anymore. It's an egg, and whatever is inside is getting ready to hatch. My name is Blake Thornfield, and I used to calibrate the seismic monitoring equipment at the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter Mission Control in Greenbelt, Maryland. Used to because 3 days ago I walked into my supervisor's office with a bottle of Kentucky bourbon and told him exactly what I thought about the lies we've been feeding the public for 53 years. The tremor started at 14:32 GMT on a Tuesday. Nothing unusual there. Lunar quakes happen all the time, mostly from tidal stress and meteorite impacts. But this one was different. It originated from precisely 847 meters beneath the Sea of Tranquility, directly below where Neil Armstrong's boot first touched alien soil. The depth reading made my coffee cup slip from my fingers. I'd been monitoring that exact coordinate grid for 7 years. There shouldn't be anything down there. My hands were still shaking when I pulled up the historical data, cross-referencing every seismic event from that location since we started proper monitoring in 1976. What I found made my stomach drop through the floor. The pattern was there, hidden in decades of data that nobody had bothered to compile chronologically. Every 24 hours, 36 minutes, and 18 seconds, the same low-frequency pulse, always from the same depth, always lasting exactly 2.7 seconds, like a heartbeat. I printed everything and stuffed it into a manila envelope that I hid inside my gym bag. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the Apollo 11 samples, the ones that never made it into the official collection. The rocks that were classified under geological survey codes that didn't exist in any public database. My clearance level wasn't high enough to access the storage manifests, but I knew someone whose was. Danny Voss worked night security at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, and we'd shared enough beers over the years for him to owe me a favor. When I called him at 3 a.m., his voice was thick with sleep. "Blake? Christ, what time is it?" "I need you to look something up for me. Sample collection ARM 11043 through ARM 11051. Anything logged under that sequence." The line went quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. "Danny, those files are above my pay grade, man. Way above. But..." His voice dropped to a whisper. "There's been weird shit happening in Building 31. Equipment running on its own. Lights flickering in patterns. Security cameras catching movement in the sealed storage areas." "What kind of movement?" "The kind that shouldn't be there." That's when I knew I was right. And that's when I started running. The next morning, my keycard wouldn't work. I stood outside Building 28 at Goddard Space Flight Center, watching the red light blink mockingly on the security reader. 15 minutes early, just like every day for the past 7 years, holding my usual gas station coffee and a stale donut. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a black sedan with government plates that I'd never seen before. "Having trouble, Blake?" I turned to find Dr. Harrison Ketch approaching from the visitors' parking area. Harry was NASA's chief planetary geologist, technically my boss's boss, and the kind of man who wore the same brown tie every day for 20 years. What struck me as odd was that he was here at 6:45 a.m. when his usual schedule started at 9. "Card reader's acting up," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Happens sometimes after system updates." He swiped his own card and held the door open. "Walk with me." The hallway felt different, longer somehow. The fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that made my teeth ache, and I noticed for the first time how the acoustic tiles on the ceiling were arranged in perfect spirals. 17 years I'd walked this corridor, and I'd never seen that pattern before. "You pulled some unusual data requests yesterday," Harry said conversationally. historical seismic compilations going back to the Apollo era. My stomach clenched. Just routine analysis, looking for long-term patterns in the tidal stress models. Right. We passed the break room where Janet from accounting was making her morning coffee. She looked up and nodded, but her smile seemed forced. Thing is, Blake, some of that data isn't technically under your purview. Storage manifests, sample collection logs. That's more archival work. We reached the elevator bank. Harry pressed the down button, which was weird because our offices were on the 3rd floor. I got curious about the correlation between seismic events and sample collection sites, I said. Professional interest. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that sounded wrong, too low, like the pitch was off. The button panel inside had an extra floor marked SL4 that I'd never noticed before. Curiosity's a valuable trait in our line of work, Harry said, pressing SL4. But sometimes it leads us into areas where we're not equipped to handle what we find. The elevator descended past the basement levels I knew existed, past the mechanical rooms and storage areas. When it finally stopped, the doors opened onto a corridor lined with polished steel panels instead of the usual beige walls. The air tasted metallic. "Where are we going, Harry?" "To satisfy your curiosity." He led me down the corridor to a security checkpoint manned by 2 guards I didn't recognize. They wore black uniforms without any identifying patches or badges. One of them had a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, and his eyes tracked our movement with mechanical precision. "Dr. Ketch," the scared guard said. His voice had a slight electronic distortion, like he was speaking through a radio. "He's cleared for level 3 viewing." "What's level 3 viewing?" I asked. "Data you've already seen, Blake. Just in proper context." Beyond the checkpoint was a room that looked like mission control, but wrong. The screens were too large, the consoles too sleek. Everything had the sterile perfection of technology that was decades ahead of what NASA used upstairs. 3 technicians worked at stations, their faces illuminated by readouts showing seismic data, gravitational measurements, and orbital mechanics that made my head spin. "This is the lunar monitoring station," Harry explained. "We've been tracking anomalous activity on the moon since 1969. Your discovery yesterday wasn't really a discovery at all. It was confirmation." One of the technicians, a thin man with prematurely grey hair, looked up from his console. "Dr. Ketch, the pulse interval is accelerating again, down to 23 hours, 14 minutes. "Thank you, Roderick." Harry turned to me. "Blake, meet Dr. Roderick Vance. He's been our lead seismic analyst for the past 12 years. Roderick stood and shook my hand. His grip was stronger than his appearance suggested, and his palm was unusually warm. "Blake Thornfield, I've reviewed your calibration reports. Excellent work. Very precise." "Thanks, I guess." I looked around the room again. "How long has this been going on?" "The monitoring. Since Apollo 11 returned with unusual samples." Harry gestured to a large display showing the moon's near side. A red dot pulsed at the Sea of Tranquility. "The activity? Well, that's more complicated." The display shifted to show a cutaway view of the lunar surface. Deep beneath the regolith, something massive and geometrically impossible twisted in the rock. It looked organic, but the scale was all wrong, kilometers across with branching structures that resembled a nervous system made of crystal and metal. "Jesus fucking Christ," I whispered. "Language, Blake." But Harry was smiling grimly. "Though I understand the sentiment. What you're looking at is why your security clearance was revoked this morning, why your keycard stopped working, why you're here instead of upstairs calibrating equipment that doesn't really need calibrating." "I don't understand." "You will." Roderick pulled up another display showing seismic data from the past week. The heartbeat pattern was clear, but there were other signals now, smaller pulses radiating outward from the main source. "Dr. Thornfield, how familiar are you with embryonic development?" The question hit me like ice water. "What does that have to do with everything?" Harry said quietly. "Because what we're monitoring isn't just alive, Blake. It's growing." The alarm started 60 seconds later. Not the normal NASA emergency klaxon. This was a deep, rhythmic pulse that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Every technician in the room froze at their consoles as red lights bathed everything in crimson shadows. "Seismic event magnitude 4.2, Roderick called out, his fingers dancing across holographic displays that definitely didn't exist in any public NASA facility. "Source depth 847 meters. Duration still ongoing." Harry grabbed my shoulder. "Blake, you need to see the collection facility, now." We rushed through corridors I was certain hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. The walls here were different, a dark metallic surface that seemed to absorb sound. Our footsteps echoed strangely, like we were walking through a cathedral instead of an underground complex. "How deep does this place go?" I asked. "Deeper than you'd believe." Harry swiped his card at another checkpoint. "Building 28 is just the surface layer. This facility extends down 7 levels. We built it after Apollo 11 brought back proof." The elevator this time had no buttons at all. It simply descended when the doors closed, carrying us past more levels than should have been possible given the Maryland topography. When it finally stopped, the doors opened onto what looked like a museum storage facility. Endless rows of climate-controlled cases stretching into darkness. "Welcome to the archive," Harry said. "Every classified sample from every lunar mission, and a few things we've never admitted to collecting." We walked between towering storage units, each labelled with codes that meant nothing to me. But as we went deeper, I noticed the labelling system changed. The early cases used standard NASA nomenclature, but the newer ones had symbols I didn't recognise. Geometric patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Here," Harry stopped at a case marked with a symbol that looked like a crystalline spiral. "Sample ARM 1147, collected during Apollo 11's extended EVA." Extended EVA? The mission reports say they only had one moonwalk. The mission reports say a lot of things that aren't entirely accurate. Harry input a code on the case's digital lock. The second EVA was classified. Armstrong and Aldrin went back out for 47 minutes to investigate an anomaly their equipment detected. A metallic signature beneath the landing site. The case opened with a soft hiss of escaping gas. Inside, suspended in a cradle of some advanced polymer, was a chunk of rock unlike anything I'd seen in NASA's public collection. It was translucent, shot through with veins of metal that pulsed with their own internal light. And as I watched, the metal veins flickered in a rhythm that matched the heartbeat pattern from my seismic data. "It's still active," I breathed. "They all are." Harry gestured to dozens of similar cases. "Every sample we've taken from that site has maintained some level of biological activity for over 50 years. But watch this." He pulled out a tablet and showed me a video feed, live footage from the moon's surface, high resolution enough to show individual rocks. The camera was focused on a familiar-looking area with distinctive boulder formations. "This is feed from Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter Camera 3. Not the publicly available images. This is the classified high-resolution array we installed in 2019. The timestamp showed today's date, approximately 30 minutes ago. As I watched, the ground around the Apollo 11 landing site began to bulge upward, forming concentric circles like ripples in a pond. But the movement was too slow, too regular to be any kind of impact or natural seismic activity. What the hell is causing that? The same thing that's causing this. Harry led me to another section of the archive where the storage cases were larger, more heavily secured. These ones required biometric scans and had warnings in multiple languages. "Sample ARM 17-001, he said, opening a case the size of a coffin. "Apollo 17's final surface activity, December 1972. Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt spent an unscheduled 6 hours excavating what they thought was an unusual mineral formation. Inside the case was something that made my mind struggle to process what I was seeing. It looked like a mechanical organ, part crystalline, part metallic, about the size of a human torso. But the metal components were moving, slowly reconfiguring themselves in patterns that seemed almost intentional. And at its center was a cavity shaped like... Is that a gestational chamber? That's what our xenobiologists think, yes. Harry closed the case. Dr. Thornfield, what I'm about to tell you violates every national security protocol we have, but recent developments have made secrecy a luxury we can't afford. He led me to a final section where a single massive case dominated the room. This one had its own power supply, its own environmental controls, and warning labels that made my blood run cold. Extreme biohazard, level 9 containment. What's in there? What's left of Dr. Marcus Webb? The name was familiar. The Apollo program geologist who disappeared in 1974. He didn't disappear, he volunteered for direct contact with the primary specimen. Harry's voice was grim. 3 days after exposure, his cellular structure began to change. The transformation was extensive. Through the case's thick viewing window, I could see something that had once been human. The basic skeletal structure was still recognizable, but everything else had been replaced with the same crystalline metallic material as the samples. The worst part was that it was still moving, slow, purposeful movements like it was trying to communicate. He's still conscious, Harry said quietly. Brain scans show activity patterns consistent with human consciousness, but distributed throughout the entire crystalline matrix. He's been trying to write something for 49 years. The thing that had been Dr. Webb pressed against the viewing window, and I could see letters scratched into the metal surface beside it. The same word, repeated hundreds of times in increasingly desperate handwriting. Offspring, offspring, offspring. Suddenly, every screen in the archive room began displaying the same feed, the live view of the moon's surface. But the bulging ground was spreading now, concentric circles expanding outward from the Apollo 11 site like a stone dropped in still water. How many samples did you take? I asked. Hundreds, from 7 different Apollo missions. And they're all biologically active. Every single one, but Blake, that's not the worst part. Harry pulled up another display showing seismic data from around the world. 3 hours ago, every major earthquake monitoring station on Earth started detecting the same rhythmic pulse pattern you discovered. Same frequency, same interval. I stared at the data. The pulse was originating from the moon, but it was being detected on Earth. That's impossible. Seismic waves can't travel through vacuum. No, they can't, but gravitational waves can, and if something massive enough is moving inside the moon. The lights in the archive room flickered once, then went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red. An electronic voice began broadcasting over the facility's intercom system. Attention all personnel, we have lost contact with Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter Mission Control. All external communications are down. Facility lockdown is now in effect. In the dim red light, I watched the thing that had been Dr. Webb scratch another word into the metal beside its viewing window. Hatching. How long? I asked. Harry checked his tablet, which was somehow still receiving data despite the communications blackout. Based on the acceleration pattern and the size of the gravitational disturbances, maybe 48 hours. Before what? Before we find out what a 3.8 billion-year-old alien life form considers to be full term. The silence lasted exactly 14 minutes. I know because I counted every second while Harry and I sat in the archive's emergency lighting, listening to the facility's life support systems cycle through their backup protocols. The red glow made everything look like the inside of a wound, and the thing that had been Dr. Webb had stopped moving entirely. Pressed against its viewing window, like it was listening for something. We need to evacuate, I said finally. Get to the surface, contact whoever's in charge of this mess. Harry didn't answer. He was staring at his tablet, scrolling through data feeds that shouldn't have been updating if all external communications were down. Harry? The pulse interval just dropped to 18 hours. His voice was barely a whisper. Blake, in your professional opinion, if a biological organism was accelerating its reproductive cycle, what would typically trigger that kind of response? External stress, threat to survival, or... The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Stimulus from a potential mate or compatible genetic material. That's what I was afraid of. The lights flickered back to full power and the intercom crackled to life with Roderick's voice. Dr. Ketch, please report to Control Room 7 immediately. We have a situation. Harry stood, but I grabbed his arm. What aren't you telling me? Blake, when you pulled those historical seismic records yesterday, you accessed them through the main NASA network, right? Standard query protocols. Yeah, of course. Why? Because every query on the NASA network logs location, time, and user credentials. The system we're dealing with, it's been dormant for millions of years, but it's not unintelligent. When you access those records, you essentially announce to something with pattern recognition capabilities that someone on Earth was finally paying attention to its heartbeat. The blood drained from my face. You're saying I woke it up? I'm saying you introduced a variable into an equation that had been stable for 53 years. We rushed through corridors that seemed to stretch longer with each step. The facility felt different now. The walls hummed with a frequency that made my bones ache, and the air tasted like copper pennies and ozone. Other personnel moved past us with mechanical urgency, their faces blank and focused. Control Room 7 was chaos. 24 technicians worked at stations displaying feeds from around the world, seismic monitoring stations, astronomical observatories, and military installations I didn't recognize. Roderick stood at the center console, his normally grey hair now completely white. What's the situation? Harry asked. Global response, Roderick said without looking up. Every government with space monitoring capabilities has detected the gravitational anomalies. Russia launched an emergency probe toward the moon 12 minutes ago. China's repositioning their entire satellite network. And the Americans. He paused, his fingers trembling over the controls. They're discussing nuclear options. Nuclear options? I stepped closer to the main display. You mean they want to nuke the moon? They want to nuke the source before whatever's inside has a chance to emerge. Roderick finally looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach clench. Blake, there's something else. The samples we've been storing, they're all responding to the acceleration. Temperature increases, increased electrical activity, structural changes. He led us to a monitoring station showing feeds from the archive. Every single storage case was displaying warning indicators, temperature spikes, containment pressure fluctuations, biological activity readings that were off the charts. How long before containment fails? Harry asked. In best estimate? 6 hours for the smaller samples, maybe less for the larger specimens. A new alarm began sounding, different from the facility lockdown alert. This one was sharper, more urgent. The main display switched to a feed from the lunar surface, and what I saw made my mouth go dry. The ground around the Apollo landing sites was cracking. Fissures spread outward in perfect geometric patterns, and from the cracks, a pale light was beginning to seep upward. But the light moved wrong. It pulsed and flowed like liquid, and wherever it touched the lunar soil, the material began to change, taking on the same crystalline metallic properties as the samples. Jesus, I breathed. It's terraforming, Harry said grimly, converting the lunar environment to something more suitable for its biology. That's when the screaming started. It came from the archive levels below us, human voices raised in terror and agony. The intercom system picked up fragments. Containment breach in Section 7. Multiple casualties. Don't let it touch you. Roderick was already pulling up security feeds from the archive. What we saw made me wish I'd never walked into NASA that morning. Dr. Webb's containment case was empty, its thick metal door peeled open like a flower. The thing that had been human moved through the storage facility with purposeful intent, approaching each of the other cases. But it wasn't breaking them open, it was touching them. And wherever its crystalline fingers made contact, the case's locking mechanisms simply dissolved. How is it doing that? I asked. Molecular manipulation, Harry said. The crystalline matrix can apparently restructure matter at the atomic level. On the security feed, I watched 3 technicians try to stop the Webb thing's advance. It touched the first one, just a brief contact with its palm against the man's forehead. The technician stopped struggling immediately. His eyes went blank, then began to glow with the same pale light seeping from the moon's surface. Turn it off, I said. We can't. Roderick's hands were shaking so badly he could barely operate the controls. It's not just Webb anymore. Look at the readings from the other cases. Every containment unit in the archive was now showing the same status: containment breached. And on the security feeds, I could see why. The samples weren't just escaping, they were coordinating, moving with synchronized purpose toward the facility's main elevator shaft. They're coming up here, Harry realized. No, Roderick said quietly. They're going to the surface. The main display switched to an external feed from the building's roof. The parking lot where I'd stood that morning was now cracked in the same geometric patterns we'd seen on the moon. And from those cracks, the same pale light was beginning to emerge. It's not just the moon, I said. The samples you brought back, they were seeds. Harry grabbed my shoulders. Blake, I need you to understand something. Every major space agency on the planet has been collecting samples from that site for decades. Not just NASA. The Russians have fragments in Moscow, the Chinese have specimens in Beijing, the Europeans have material in Geneva. The implications hit me like a sledgehammer. How many seeds? Thousands. Scattered across every continent. The facility shook as something massive moved through the levels below us. The lights went out again, and this time, they didn't come back. Emergency power cast everything in that surgical red glow as the sound of tearing metal echoed up from the archive. The Webb thing is in the elevator shaft, Roderick reported, his voice cracking. Climbing toward level 3. Evacuation protocols, Harry asked. Surface exits are compromised. The light, it spread to the entire building perimeter. I looked at the feeds showing the transformed landscape around our facility. What had been ordinary Maryland countryside was now a crystalline wasteland, shot through with veins of that pale, moving light. And in the distance, I could see similar lights beginning to glow from the direction of Washington, D.C. How long before it reaches populated areas? I asked. Roderick consulted his readings. Based on the expansion rate, maybe 4 hours to reach the D.C. metro area. The elevator shaft filled with an eerie harmonics, not quite music, but patterns of sound that seemed to resonate directly in my skull. And underneath it, I could hear something else. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving in perfect synchronization. They're not just climbing, Harry realized, they're singing. The harmonics grew stronger and I felt something shift in my head, like a radio tuning into a frequency I'd never noticed before. For just a moment, I could sense the vast network of transformed matter spreading across the planet's surface. All of it connected. All of it part of something infinitely larger and older than human civilization. And at the center of it all, 240,000 miles away, something ancient and patient was finally ready to be born. Harry, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. I think I know what it wants. What? Us. All of us. It doesn't want to destroy humanity. I looked at the spreading network of light on the monitors. It wants to improve us. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and the thing that had been Dr. Webb stepped into the control room. Up close, I could see that the transformation was beautiful in its own way. Every crystalline surface reflected light in patterns that seemed to contain infinite depth and complexity. When it spoke, its voice was Webb's voice, but layered with harmonics that made my bones vibrate. Blake, it said, we've been waiting for you to wake up. The Webb thing didn't attack. Instead, it stood in the doorway of Control Room 7, its crystalline face reflecting the emergency lighting in patterns that almost looked like expressions. When it tilted its head, I heard the sound of wind chimes made from metal that didn't exist on Earth. Blake Thornfield, it said again, and this time I caught something in the layered harmonics of its voice, recognition, almost fondness. Seismic calibration specialist, born October 15, 1987, in Baltimore, Maryland. Bachelor's degree in geophysics from University of Maryland. 7 years monitoring equipment that was specifically designed to detect our awakening. Harry stepped between us, but the Webb thing ignored him completely. You've been listening to our heartbeat for years without knowing it, it continued. Every calibration, every sensor adjustment, every data verification, You were fine-tuning the instruments that would eventually recognize the acceleration pattern. What do you want? I managed to ask. To show you the truth about what's happening. The Webb thing gestured toward the main display, and somehow the screens responded to its movement, cycling through feeds I'd never seen before. What you're calling an invasion is actually an evacuation. The new feeds showed deep space, images from telescopes I didn't recognize. But what they revealed made my blood turn to ice. Something vast was moving through the outer solar system, blotting out stars as it passed. Not a ship or a craft, but a darkness so complete it seemed to consume light itself. What is that? The reason we've been sleeping for 3.8 billion years, Webb Thing said. The reason our progenitors seeded potential worlds with emergency protocols. Roderick had backed against the far wall, but he was still monitoring his instruments. Blake, the gravitational readings. Whatever that thing is, it's massive. Planet-sized, maybe larger. It consumes biological matter, Webb Thing explained. Breaks down organic compounds to fuel its journey through the galaxy. It's been dormant for millions of years, but your species' electromagnetic emissions over the past century have created a beacon it can follow. Harry laughed bitterly. So it's our fault. Not fault, evolution. Every spacefaring civilization eventually attracts its attention. Most die. Some, if they're fortunate enough to have inherited our emergency protocols, adapt. The screens showed more images. Worlds that had been stripped clean, their atmospheres gone, their surfaces scoured down to bare rock. But some of the images showed something else. Planets covered in the same crystalline formations we were seeing on Earth, but intact, inhabited by beings that looked like elegant combinations of organic and metallic components. Transformation isn't death, Webb Thing said. It's the only way to survive what's coming. The crystalline matrix can exist in vacuum, can process energy directly from stellar radiation, can coordinate across interplanetary distances. It's what we were designed to become. Designed? I asked. Our ancestors encountered this same threat 3.8 billion years ago. They had a choice: extinction or evolution. They chose evolution, but they ran out of time to complete the transformation, so they created contingency protocols, seeds that could remain dormant until a species on the inhabited worlds reached technological sophistication. Harry was studying the deep space feeds. How long before that thing reaches Earth? 47 hours, Webb Thing replied, but the transformation process requires at least 72 hours to achieve full integration, which is why your government's nuclear solution presents a problem. Roderick looked up from his console. The strike authorization came through 6 minutes ago. They're targeting every confirmed seismic source simultaneously. Moscow, Beijing, Geneva, here. Everywhere we have samples. Nuclear detonation will disrupt the transformation network, Webb Thing said. Humanity will face the consumption event in your current biological form. Extinction probability, 99.7%. The facility shook again, but this time it wasn't from the things moving below us. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of aircraft engines and the whine of military vehicles. How many people have been transformed so far? I asked. Approximately 2,847 individuals across 6 continents, Webb Thing replied. All of them volunteers from our storage facilities who chose integration over termination. Volunteers? Blake, Dr. Webb wasn't forced into transformation. None of them were. When they understood what was coming, they made the logical choice. Harry pulled up tactical displays on his console. Military cordon is forming around the building. Looks like they're setting up for a siege rather than immediate bombardment. They want to study the transformation process first, Webb Thing said. Your species always prioritizes data collection over survival. It's both admirable and counterproductive. I looked at the screens showing the spreading crystalline networks around the world. What would happen if we let the transformation continue? Within 72 hours, roughly 40% of your population would achieve integration. The remainder would be preserved in suspension until the consumption event passes, approximately 6 months. Then gradual integration could continue at a sustainable pace. And if we don't, total extinction in 47 hours. Roderick was monitoring communications channels. Blake, they're bringing in Dr. Amanda Cross from the Defense Intelligence Agency. She's the Pentagon's specialist in biological weapons defense. The name made Webb Thing pause. Dr. Cross supervised the disposal of samples deemed too dangerous for research. 17 specimens were incinerated under her authorization in 2019. That's a problem, Harry said. That's a declaration of war, Webb Thing corrected. The network has been attempting peaceful integration, but if your military forces begin systematic destruction of transformation sites, what? The integration process will shift to survival mode, forced conversion instead of voluntary acceptance. It's less elegant, but much faster. The implications hit me like a freight train. How much faster? 6 hours for full planetary integration. Through the facility's external cameras, I watched military vehicles taking positions around our building. Helicopters circled overhead, and in the distance I could see the contrails of aircraft that were definitely not civilian. We need to establish communication, I said. Explain the situation to whoever's in charge. Blake, Harry said quietly, look at the seismic monitoring data. I checked the displays. Every transformation site around the world was showing identical readings, the same accelerating pulse pattern that had started this entire mess. But now the pulses were synchronizing, creating interference patterns that were registering as artificial earthquakes. They're not just communicating, I realized. They're coordinating a response to the military threat. Webb Thing nodded. The network is preparing defensive measures. If systematic termination begins, forced integration protocols will activate automatically. Can you stop it? Yes, but only with voluntary cooperation from someone the network trusts. Someone like who? Someone who first recognized our awakening. Someone whose queries initially established the communication pattern. Webb Thing looked directly at me. Someone who could interface with the monitoring equipment to send a stand-down signal. Harry stepped forward. Blake, don't even consider it. We have no guarantee this thing is telling the truth about any of this. We have no guarantee it's lying either. I looked at the deep space images again. And if that thing out there is real... It is, Roderick said quietly. He'd been running calculations on his console. I've been cross-referencing the gravitational data with archived observations from the Hubble Space Telescope. There are gaps in the stellar mapping from this region of space going back 18 months. Something that massive could definitely cause the occlusion patterns we're seeing. Outside, the sound of helicopters was getting closer. Through the external feeds, I could see soldiers in hazmat suits setting up equipment that looked suspiciously like flame units. Blake, Webb Thing said, the network needs a decision. Integration or incineration. Cooperation or conquest. The choice is still yours, but not for much longer. A new voice crackled over the facility's intercom, authoritative, female, and coldly professional. This is Dr. Amanda Cross, Defense Intelligence Agency. You have 60 seconds to surrender any personnel involved in unauthorized biological experimentation, or we begin sterilization procedures. Shit, Harry whispered. Blake, whatever you're going to do it now. I'll do it. The words left my mouth before I'd consciously made the decision. Harry spun toward me, his face pale in the emergency lighting. Blake, you can't be serious. Look at the data, Harry. Look at what's coming. I gestured toward the deep space feeds showing the approaching darkness. If that thing consumes biological matter and we're all biological matter, then the math is pretty fucking simple. Webb Thing stepped closer. The interface process requires direct neural contact with the monitoring equipment. Once established, you'll be able to communicate with every transformation site simultaneously. And after that? After that, you'll understand what we understand. See what we see. The choice to remain individual or join the collective will be yours. Dr. Cross's voice came over the intercom again. 30 seconds. We have thermal imaging showing multiple biological signatures in your facility. Surrender now or face immediate neutralization. Roderick was frantically working at his console. Blake, I can route the building's seismic monitoring system through the main communication array. If you're really going to do this, now's the time. I moved toward the central monitoring station, but Harry grabbed my arm. "Wait, there's something you need to know first." "Harry, we don't have time. The seismic equipment you've been calibrating for 7 years, it wasn't just for monitoring." His grip tightened. "It was designed to interface with whatever we found down there. Every adjustment you made, every calibration refinement, you were teaching it to recognize human neural patterns." The blood drained from my face. "You knew. All this time you knew what was going to happen." "Not specifically, but we knew that eventually someone would need to make direct contact." Harry's voice was strained. "Blake, you weren't assigned to this project randomly. Your psychological profile, your technical skills, your neural pattern compatibility, everything was evaluated and selected." "You used me?" "We prepared you. There's a difference." Webb thing moved between us. "The deception was necessary, but the choice remains genuine. Integration cannot be forced if it's to succeed long-term." Through the external cameras, I could see soldiers in hazmat suits approaching the building's entrances. They carried equipment that looked like modified flamethrowers, but the flames coming from the nozzles burned blue-white and left crystalline residue on the concrete where they tested the stream. 20 seconds, Dr. Cross announced. I sat down at the monitoring station and placed my hands on the neural interface ports that had been disguised as standard input terminals. The metal was warm, almost body temperature, and I could feel a subtle vibration that seemed to sync with my pulse. "Roderick, bring the system online." "Blake, wait!" Harry's protest was cut off as Roderick activated the interface. The sensation was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It started as a mild electrical tingling in my fingertips, but within seconds it spread up my arms and into my spinal column. My vision blurred, then expanded beyond the normal spectrum. I could suddenly perceive electromagnetic fields, gravitational fluctuations, quantum mechanical interactions happening at the molecular level. And then I was connected. The network opened up around me like a vast neural web spanning the entire planet. I could sense every transformation site, every integrated individual, every pulse of communication flowing between them. But more than that, I could see the approaching consumer entity with perfect clarity. It was massive beyond comprehension, a structure that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions my human brain couldn't fully process. Where it had passed, entire solar systems had been reduced to sterile debris fields. But the transformed worlds, the ones with crystalline networks, those it had passed by entirely. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, and my voice echoed through every speaker in every facility connected to the network. "Blake!" Harry was shouting, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. "Can you hear me?" I could hear him, but I could also hear everything else. The thermal detonation charges being placed around the building, Dr. Cross coordinating with similar teams in Moscow, Beijing, Geneva, military satellites repositioning to monitor the simultaneous strikes, and underneath it all the approaching consumer entity's gravitational signature, creating subtle tidal effects that were already beginning to disrupt Earth's magnetic field. "Integration proceeding normally," Webb thing reported. "Neural pattern compatibility confirmed. Network access achieved." Through the network, I could feel the panic spreading through the other facilities as military forces surrounded them. In Geneva, the research team was barricading themselves in their archive levels. In Moscow, the transformation had accelerated and was spreading beyond the facility into the surrounding city. In Beijing, they were attempting to destroy their samples before capture. "I can stop the military strikes," I said, my voice still echoing through the network. "But I need to send a signal they'll understand." "What kind of signal?" Harry asked. I reached through the network to every seismic monitoring station on the planet. The amount of data flowing through my consciousness was staggering. Real-time gravitational measurements, electromagnetic field fluctuations, quantum mechanical interactions. But I could control it, direct it, focus it into a single coordinated pulse. Every earthquake detector on Earth registered the same event simultaneously. A magnitude 1.0 tremor lasting exactly 30 seconds, originating from every major population center at precisely the same moment. The pattern spelled out a message in Morse code, THR, EATEXTERNAL TRANSFORMATIONNECESSARY FORTYFIVEHOURSREMAINING. Blake, what did you just do? Roderick asked. I told them the truth. But Harry was looking at the facility's structural monitoring systems with growing alarm. The neural interface is drawing too much power. The building's electrical grid can't handle this level of output. He was right. I could feel the strain building in the system. The crystalline components in the monitoring equipment were channeling far more energy than they'd been designed for. Warning indicators flashed across every console as power conduits began overloading. The network connection is destabilizing the local matrix, Webb said. If the interface fails catastrophically, it could trigger an uncontrolled transformation cascade throughout the region. What does that mean? I asked. Instead of gradual integration, anyone within 50 miles would undergo instant conversion. But without proper preparation, the survival rate would be approximately 30%. Through the external cameras, I watched Dr. Cross receive the coordinated seismic message. She was arguing with someone over a secure radio link, gesturing angrily at the readings her equipment was showing. The thermal detonation charges remained in place, but the countdown had stopped. Blake, you need to disconnect, Harry said urgently. The power grid is reaching critical failure. But I could see something through the network that they couldn't. The consumer entity had detected our coordinated signal. Its trajectory was adjusting, course corrections that would bring it to Earth 6 hours ahead of schedule. It knows we're here, I said. The signal worked too well. We've got 41 hours instead of 47. Then disconnect before the system overloads, Harry insisted. No. I made the decision even as electrical fires began sparking from overloaded circuits around the control room. If I disconnect now, the network loses coordination. The transformation sites won't be able to establish proper integration protocols in time. Blake, you'll die if you stay connected during a system failure. Maybe, but everyone dies if I don't. The building's main power grid failed with a sound like a thunderclap. Emergency power kicked in, but it wasn't enough to maintain the neural interface at full capacity. I felt the network connection wavering, breaking apart into fragments. But then something unexpected happened. Webb approached the monitoring station and placed its crystalline hand on the interface ports beside mine. Auxiliary power, it said. The transformed matrix can provide the energy the system requires. The network stabilized immediately, but I could feel the connection changing. Instead of accessing the network through human technology, I was interfacing directly with the crystalline consciousness. The boundaries between my thoughts and the collective began to blur. Blake, your brain patterns are synchronizing with the network, Roderick called out, his voice heavy with concern. If the integration proceeds much further, you won't be able to disconnect at all. Through the facility's compromised sensors, I watched Dr. Cross receive new orders. The thermal detonation charges were being replaced with something that looked like miniature nuclear devices. Whatever they were, the radiation signatures were off the charts. Neutron bombs, Harry said grimly. They're going to sterilize the entire area. How long before detonation? 15 minutes. I felt the network's response before I consciously decided anything. Every transformation site simultaneously began emergency acceleration protocols. The gradual integration process shifted into something far more aggressive. Around the world, the crystalline networks expanded outward from their source points at exponential rates. Blake, what's happening? Harry asked. Survival mode, I replied, but the voice wasn't entirely mine anymore. The network is prioritizing continuation over consent. Can you stop it? I don't think I want to. That's when Harry revealed the pistol he'd been concealing under his jacket. Military issue, loaded with rounds that gleamed with the same blue-white energy signature as the thermal weapons outside. Blake, I'm sorry, but I can't let you complete the integration. Harry, don't. The Blake I've worked with for 7 years would never sacrifice human autonomy for survival, which means you're not Blake anymore. He fired 3 rounds into the monitoring station's central processing unit. The neural interface exploded in a shower of sparks and crystalline fragments. The connection to the network severed instantly. leaving me gasping and disoriented in the emergency lighting. But the damage was done. Around the world, the accelerated transformation continued without central coordination. Instead of elegant integration, it was becoming chaotic, forced conversion. Webb Thing turned toward Harry with what might have been disappointment. "You have doomed both species." "Maybe, but at least we'll die as ourselves." Outside, I could hear Dr. Cross announcing the final countdown to detonation. 5 minutes remaining. The silence after the neural interface exploded felt like falling into a vacuum. I sat, slumped in the ruined monitoring chair, my hands still tingling from the severed connection. The absence of the network was worse than physical pain, like suddenly going deaf after hearing a symphony or losing sight after watching a sunrise. For those few minutes, I'd been part of something vast and purposeful. Now I was just Blake Thornfield again, trapped in a doomed facility with neutron bombs ticking down outside. 4 minutes, Dr. Cross announced over the intercom. Harry kept the pistol trained on me, but his hands were shaking. "Blake, I know you think I betrayed you, but you did betray me." I stood up slowly, pieces of crystalline debris falling from my clothes. "But not the way you think." "What do you mean?" 7 years ago, when NASA recruited me for this project, do you know why I really took the job? I looked at the destroyed monitoring station, at the twisted metal and shattered crystal that had been my connection to something infinitely larger than myself. It wasn't for the career advancement or the security clearance. Webb Thing was standing perfectly still, but I could see light patterns flickering beneath its crystalline surface, like it was processing massive amounts of data. "My brother David was an astronaut," I continued. "Space Shuttle Columbia, February 1st, 2003. He died when the thermal protection system failed during re-entry. 7 crew members, gone in seconds because of a piece of foam insulation that broke off during launch." Harry's expression softened. "Blake, I didn't know. Nobody knew. It wasn't in my personnel file because I used my mother's maiden name on my application. David Crenshaw, mission specialist. He was going to be the first geologist to conduct extended orbital surveys of lunar mineral formations." 3 minutes, Dr. Cross's voice crackled with static interference. "After Columbia, NASA grounded the shuttle program for over 2 years. David's research died with him. But before the mission, he'd told me about anomalous readings from the Apollo sample collection sites. Gravitational inconsistencies that didn't match the official mineral surveys." Webb Thing finally spoke. "Your brother detected the dormant network signatures. He died trying to understand what you people found up there, and now you're asking me to help you complete his work." I looked at Harry. "That's the real betrayal. Not that you manipulated me into this position, but that you made me choose between honoring his memory and saving his species." Roderick was hunched over his emergency console, monitoring the chaotic transformation reports from around the world. "Blake, the forced conversion process is accelerating beyond sustainable parameters. Moscow's population centers are reporting 47% integration, but with a 23% mortality rate, Geneva's completely offline. Beijing." He paused. "Beijing's gone dark entirely." "The network requires coordination," Webb Thing said. "Without central guidance, the transformation becomes destructive rather than preservative." 2 minutes. I looked at the destroyed interface station. The central processing unit was completely fried, but some of the peripheral neural ports were still intact, sparking and damaged, but potentially functional. "Is there another way to establish network contact?" I asked Webb Thing. "Direct biological interface, but the process would be irreversible." "How irreversible?" "Complete integration. Your consciousness would join the collective permanently. Individual identity would be absorbed." Harry stepped closer. "Blake, don't even consider it. There has to be another option." "What other option?" I gestured toward the countdown displays. "In 90 seconds, this facility gets sterilized. In 40 hours, that thing out there arrives and consumes every living organism on the planet. The only choice is integration or extinction." "There's a third choice," Harry said quietly. "I've been monitoring the deep space tracking data. The consumer entity's course corrections are based on electromagnetic emissions. If we could shut down all human technology simultaneously, complete global communications blackout, it might pass by Earth entirely. And leave us defenseless against the next cosmic threat that comes along, or the one after that. I shook my head. David died trying to understand what's out there. I won't dishonor that by choosing ignorance over evolution. 1 minute. Webb thing approached the damaged neural interface. Blake, if you choose integration, I can serve as a buffer during the transition. Your individual consciousness would be preserved within the collective rather than dissolved into it. What does that mean? You would retain your memories, your personality, your decision-making autonomy, but you would also have access to the knowledge and capabilities of the entire network. Roderick looked up from his console. Blake, the neutron bomb signatures are spiking. Whatever you're going to do. I sat back down at the ruined monitoring station and placed my hands on the intact neural ports. But instead of activating the technological interface, I looked at Webb thing. Show me David's research. Webb thing placed its crystalline hand on my forehead. The contact was cool and smooth, like touching polished stone. But beneath the surface, I could feel vast amounts of information waiting to be accessed. This will hurt, it warned. The data transfer was like being struck by lightning made of pure information. I saw David's shuttle mission from perspectives he'd never imagined, through lunar monitoring stations that had been watching his orbital surveys, through sample containers that had been responding to his presence, through the dormant network that had recognized his genetic signature as compatible for integration. David hadn't died in an accident. The thermal protection system failure had been caused by the samples in NASA's storage responding to his proximity during shuttle re-entry. They'd been trying to reach him to complete a connection that had been building since Apollo 11. His death had been the network's first attempt at making contact with a compatible human consciousness. 30 seconds. He was supposed to be the one, I whispered. You've been waiting 50 years for someone with his neural pattern compatibility. Yes, but genetic similarity is sufficient. His research, combined with your technical expertise, creates the same potential for successful integration. Harry was backing toward the exit. Blake, I'm sorry, but I can't watch this. Harry, wait. I stood up, still maintaining contact with Webb thing. The monitoring station in Building 12. It has manual override capabilities for the entire eastern seaboard seismic network. What about it? If the integration works, if I can coordinate the transformation process, you'll need to get to that station and input a shutdown sequence. Code 7749-alpha-gamma. It'll prevent the network from expanding beyond sustainable parameters. How do you know that code? Because David figured it out. It's in his personal logs from the Columbia mission. 10 seconds. I closed my eyes and allowed Webb thing to complete the neural interface. The sensation was unlike the technological connection I'd experienced earlier. This was organic, gradual, like sinking into warm water. My consciousness expanded outward, touching every node in the global network. But this time, I maintained my individual perspective. I could sense the collective knowledge and capabilities, but I was still Blake Thornfield, still David's brother, still someone who'd spent 7 years listening for signals from space. 5, 4, 3. Through the network, I reached out to every transformation site simultaneously. Instead of chaotic forced conversion, I established controlled integration protocols. The mortality rates dropped immediately as the process shifted from desperate survival mode to coordinated evolution. 2, 1. The neutron bombs detonated with a flash of light, visible even through the facility's deep underground levels. But the explosion barely registered in my expanded consciousness. The network had already evacuated everyone from the blast zones, either through integration or through transportation, to areas outside the detonation radius. Blake? Harry's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you still... you? I opened my eyes, which now perceived electromagnetic spectra far beyond human vision. I'm still me, Harry. But I'm also more than me. Through the network, I could sense the consumer entity adjusting its course again, It had detected the coordinated transformation and was accelerating toward Earth. Arrival time, 38 hours. Harry, you need to get to Building 12, now. What about you? I looked at the facility around us, at the technology that had brought us to this moment, at the choice between extinction and evolution that every species eventually faced. I need to prepare for war. The consumer entity arrived 18 hours early. I felt its presence before any human instrument could detect it. A massive gravitational distortion sliding into the outer solar system like a cancer made of dark matter and hunger. Through the network, I watched every space-based telescope on Earth struggle to process readings that violated basic physics. Blake, we're getting impossible data from the Deep Space Network. Harry's voice crackled through the emergency communication system. He'd made it to Building 12 and was monitoring the global situation from the manual override station. The thing's mass signature is Christ, it's larger than Jupiter, but it's not reflecting any electromagnetic radiation. I stood in what remained of Control Room 7, my consciousness split between my physical body and the vast network spanning 6 continents. Through a million sensors, I could perceive the entity's approach with terrifying clarity. It wasn't a ship or a creature, it was something that existed partially outside normal space-time, reaching into our reality like fingers through a soap bubble. Gravitational shear effects beginning at Pluto's orbit, I reported, my voice carrying simultaneously through human communication systems and the crystalline resonance network. We've got maybe 6 hours before it reaches Earth's gravitational well. How many people have achieved integration? Harry asked. I consulted the network's collective consciousness. 47 million worldwide, another 200 million in various stages of transformation. And the rest? Still human, still vulnerable. Through the network, I could sense the integrated populations working with mechanical efficiency. In Moscow, they were constructing massive crystalline resonance arrays designed to create gravitational interference patterns. In Geneva, the transformed scientists were performing calculations that pushed the boundaries of theoretical physics. In Beijing, they were doing something I couldn't fully comprehend, manipulating quantum field fluctuations to create pockets of space-time that didn't technically exist within our universe. But it wouldn't be enough. The consumer entity was too large, too alien, too fundamentally opposed to organic existence. Blake, I'm reading massive electromagnetic interference from the moon, Harry reported. Whatever's down there, it's responding to the approaching entity. He was right. The ancient core beneath the Sea of Tranquility was accelerating its rhythm beyond anything we'd recorded. But now I could understand what it was really doing. Not just awakening, but preparing for birth. The 3.8 billion-year-old emergency protocol was finally activating its primary function. Harry, I need you to route all available power to the seismic monitoring network. Everything. Military satellites, civilian communication arrays, the entire electrical grid if necessary. That'll cause a global blackout. Do it. Through the network, I reached out to every transformed consciousness on the planet. For the first time since integration began, I addressed them not as separate individuals, but as a single coordinated intelligence. This is Blake Thornfield, Network Coordination Node. We have one option remaining. The lunar core isn't just a monitoring device, it's a weapon. But activation requires total energy coordination from every integrated consciousness simultaneously. The response was immediate. 47 million minds focused their attention through the crystalline network toward a single point 240,000 miles away. The sensation was indescribable, like being part of a cosmic neuron firing in a brain the size of a planet. The moon's surface began to crack. Fissures spread outward from the Apollo landing sites in perfect geometric patterns, revealing structures beneath that had been waiting since before multicellular life existed on Earth. What emerged wasn't technological in any sense humans would recognize. It was biological architecture, crystalline organisms that had been dormant for geological ages. Jesus fucking Christ, Harry whispered over the communication link. Blake, whatever you just did, every gravitational detector on the planet is going haywire. The lunar core was expanding, but not randomly. It was unfolding according to patterns that had been encoded in its structure billions of years ago. The moon itself was becoming something else, part weapon, part organism, part gateway to spaces that existed between dimensions. But the process was consuming enormous amounts of energy. I could feel the strain building in the network as every integrated consciousness channeled their life force toward the lunar transformation. People were dying, not violently but peacefully, their consciousness absorbed into the collective as their physical forms converted entirely to crystalline matrix. "Blake, integration mortality rates are spiking," Harry reported. "Whatever you're doing, it's killing them." "I know." "Then stop." "I can't. If we stop now, the activation sequence fails and the consumer entity reaches Earth unopposed." Through space-based telescopes controlled by the network, I watched the consumer entity detect the lunar transformation. Its approach trajectory shifted, gravitational tentacles reaching toward Earth with predatory interest. But something was wrong. It was hesitating, probing the space around the moon instead of continuing its direct approach. "It's afraid," I realized. "The entity has encountered this defensive system before." "What defensive system?" "The moon isn't Earth's natural satellite. It's an artificial construct, placed here by whoever created the network. A fortress designed specifically to counter entities like this one." The consumer entity's surface, if it had a surface, began to ripple with patterns of darkness that absorbed light itself. It was adapting, evolving countermeasures against the lunar defenses. But the adaptation process required time, and that was something we could exploit. "Harry, initiate the manual override sequence. Code 7749-alpha-gamma. That'll shut down the entire network." "No, it'll redirect all network energy to a single point, the lunar core. Total conversion of every integrated consciousness into pure energy and channel it through the moon's weapon system." "Blake, that means everyone who achieved integration dies, including me." The silence on the communication link stretched for 10 seconds. "There has to be another way," Harry said finally. "There is. We could let the entity consume Earth, then hope another species somewhere else in the galaxy develops better defenses. But that's not really a choice, is it?" I could feel the network's collective consciousness waiting for my decision. 47 million minds poised between existence and sacrifice. They trusted me to make the choice that would preserve not just humanity, but all organic life in this solar system. "Blake," a new voice joined the communication link. Webb Thing was speaking through the facility's intercom system. "The transformation doesn't have to result in death. Individual consciousness can be preserved within the lunar matrix. You would continue to exist, but as part of the moon's defensive system." "For how long?" "Until the next threat arrives, possibly millions of years." I thought about David, about his research into the Apollo anomalies, about the choice between exploration and safety that every spacefaring species eventually faced. He died trying to understand what was waiting out there in the dark between stars. Now I had a chance to complete his work in a way he'd never imagined. "Harry, input the override sequence." "Blake." "Do it, that's an order." The manual override activated with a sound like thunder rolling across dimensions. Every integrated consciousness on Earth felt the pull simultaneously, not death, but transformation into something beyond individual existence. The crystalline networks dissolved, converting matter directly into energy that streamed toward the moon in columns of light visible to the naked eye. I felt myself dispersing, my consciousness spreading across lunar distances as my physical form became part of the energy transfer. But instead of dissolution, I found expansion. My awareness encompassed the entire moon, felt its ancient mechanisms activating for the first time in geological ages. The weapon fired. It wasn't a beam or a projectile, it was a manipulation of space-time itself, creating a pocket of universe where the physical laws that allowed the consumer entity to exist simply didn't apply. The entity's massive form began to collapse inward, dark matter and exotic energy folding into configurations that couldn't maintain cohesion in normal space. But the entity fought back. Gravitational lances struck the moon's surface, tearing away chunks of material that had existed since the solar system's formation. The ancient defensive systems began to fail under assault from something that had learned to counter them over millions of years of cosmic predation. "Blake!" Harry's voice reached me through quantum entanglement patterns I barely understood. "The network energy is depleting, the weapons losing power." He was right. The total conversion of Earth's integrated population had provided enough energy for the initial attack, but sustaining the assault required more power than even 47 million lives could provide. I made the final choice. Instead of preserving my consciousness within the lunar matrix as Webb thing had promised, I converted my entire being into raw energy and fed it directly into the weapon system. My last coherent thought was of David, floating in Columbia's crew compartment during those final seconds before re-entry, looking down at Earth and wondering what secrets were hidden in the Apollo samples. The consumer entity screamed across dimensions as it died, its death throes creating gravitational waves that would be detected by civilizations on the far side of the galaxy. When it was over, the moon hung in Earth's sky, scarred and partially molten but intact. Harry's voice echoed across empty frequencies, calling my name into the void where 47 million consciousness had once existed. All that answered him was the sound of silence and the slow, steady pulse of a crystalline heart that had finally stopped beating. I found Blake's brother's research notes in a storage locker in Baltimore. David Crenshaw had been tracking gravitational anomalies from lunar orbit for 3 weeks before Columbia's re-entry. His personal logs, encrypted on a hard drive his family never knew existed, detailed electromagnetic signatures that matched perfectly with the readings Blake discovered 50 years later. "Something's been waiting up there since before humans existed," David had written. "The Apollo samples aren't just rocks. They're biological archives, instructions for evolution." Today marks 63 days since Blake sacrificed himself to activate a weapon older than complex life on Earth. The official story involves solar flares and meteor impacts. 47 million people disappeared, and the government explains it as mass hysteria and coordination failures during the crisis. I know better. The seismic monitoring stations still register anomalous readings from the moon. Not the rhythmic heartbeat that led Blake to the truth, but something else. Interference patterns that almost sound like voices when you run them through audio processing software. Sometimes I think I can hear Blake's voice in the static, along with millions of others who chose integration over extinction. NASA decommissioned the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter 3 days after the event. The last images it transmitted showed crystalline formations spreading across the moon's far side, structures that looked disturbingly organic despite being composed of materials that shouldn't exist in nature. The consumer entity left traces. Deep space monitoring stations detect gravitational echoes from its destruction, ripples in space-time that will probably propagate for thousands of years. Other civilizations on the far side of the galaxy will eventually detect those waves and know that somewhere in the Milky Way, a species successfully defended itself against cosmic predation. But at what cost? I've spent 2 months analyzing the final data transmissions from every monitoring station that connected to Blake's network. The energy signatures suggest the integrated consciousnesses weren't destroyed when they powered the lunar weapon. They were transformed into something that exists partially outside normal space-time, distributed across quantum fields that interface with reality at points we can't directly observe. Blake might still be conscious somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, along with 47 million others who chose evolution over individual survival. The thought both comforts and terrifies me. 3 weeks ago, my security clearance was revoked. Yesterday, I received discharge papers from NASA citing psychological instability following traumatic events. Tonight, someone broke into my apartment while I was at the grocery store. Nothing was stolen, but every piece of electronic equipment had been carefully examined. They're erasing everyone who knew the truth. This hard drive contains copies of everything: seismic data, transformation records, Blake's final communications with the network, David Crenshaw's research notes. I'm hiding it where Blake told me his brother used to store backup copies of his shuttle mission data. Inside the monument to the Dream Monument at Kennedy Space Center, sealed in a waterproof container behind the memorial plaque for Columbia's crew. If you're reading this, it means someone eventually connected the dots between the Apollo anomalies and the event. It means humanity survived long enough to ask the right questions about what happened in 2024. Blake always said the universe is full of things that want to consume organic life. But he also proved that sometimes evolution finds a way to fight back. The moon still hangs in the sky, scarred but intact. On clear nights, if you look carefully, you can see faint lights moving across its surface, patterns too regular to be natural, too purposeful to be geological. I think they're still up there, Blake and the others, standing watch against the dark between stars, waiting for the next threat. Dr. Harrison Ketch, final entry.